I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Rahul Gehani, partner, is a member of Everest Group's pricing assurance team. As one of the team's founding members, Rahul's helped the team grow capabilities across IT applications, infrastructure, and in various business process services segments. Abhishek Sharma, partner, is a member of the pricing assurance team and assists clients on topics related to price and contract benchmarking, strategic engagement reviews, and sourcing cost rationalization. Pratik Gupta, Vice President, is a member of the pricing insurance team practice, assisting clients on topics related to solution design and review, pricing and contract assessment, cost optimization, and services benchmarking in IT applications and digital services. Kunal Verma, Practice Director, is a member of the pricing assurance team and assists clients on topics related to price benchmarking, solution review, and contract evaluation for business process services. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Abhishek.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to today's session. Now, before we get started with some of the thoughts around the future and the pricing impact, I just want to do a quick recap of 5 things we've learned through the past months of 2022. So let's get started with that. Point number 1, the talent shortage remains complicated. We seem to be a bit at the cusp of things, but still, just given the momentum of the shortage and the challenges, there's still a lot of complication which both providers and enterprises are facing. Point number 2, surprise, or no surprise, price hikes have been practically the highest in the last 6 months due to these unprecedented talent challenges. Think of this as a bit of a crescendo and some pent up requirements just kind of coming to the fore, which has led to unprecedented hikes. The peak in pricing is near. We can be sure of that, but hard to gauge exactly where it is because the economic environment that we are currently in seems to be very different from some of the other previous kind of similar situations we've had over the past couple of decades. The 4th point, and this is important to note, that supplier margins have decreased in recent quarters. Everyone can see that, but only to return to pre-pandemic levels. What's happened in the past 4 to 5 quarters is that when the talent crunch started to show up, the margins had actually gone up. So it was pretty good going for the providers. So while the decrease has happened, it needs to be seen in the context of the past 3 years and not just the past 18 months. Finally, moving to alternate commercial models can result in genuine cost savings, as we've learned in many examples, because some of those models can help absorb the wage hikes much better than a straight pass-through on a T&M model. Now, as we move ahead, we've done something slightly different today. The quick polls usually happen a bit later in these sessions, but just given how important this is, the topic is, we thought it'll be good to have some participant inputs up front. So I can already see fastest finger first what stakeholders expect to be the top challenge in 2023. All right, maybe let's give it another 5 seconds. All right, the results, I guess, are up to see. Unsurprisingly, cost control seems to be the case because we also believe that 2023 is going to be the year of cost control. But talent availability isn't really far behind. Rahul, any thoughts based on, and this is quite a good set, 327 respondents.
Yes. So Abhishek, I think the results are in line with what we would have expected. In recent times, clearly talent availability was the predominant challenge that both providers and enterprises were dealing with. But as we look ahead, given the economic uncertainty, we can kind of gauge that, in the minds of enterprises, cost control is now, taking precedence over anything else. So, I'll say, broadly agree with these poll results.
Great, thanks, Rahul. I think this is a good segue into the start of what we want to cover today. So effectively, we'll cover four main discussion points. We'll start with how demand has evolved over 2022, post which we'll move on to the impact seen on pricing, because both of these go hand in hand. Now, we also know that pricing is never seen in isolation. So we'll speak a bit about the most discussed commercial terms and conditions over the past few months. And finally, the few minutes on an open discussion about what 2023 holds from a pricing perspective. During this time, we'll also start to answer some of the questions we've received from the participants. So without further ado, let's move ahead and see how demand has evolved. Pradeep, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Abhishek. So as you have already pointed out, pricing shouldn't be seen in isolation. Now let's see some of the events that have happened as the year has progressed. So 2022 started on a very positive note, right? The high momentum in demand that was created in H2 of 2021 kind of continued at the start of 2022 as well. And the reason being, more and more enterprises were kind of continuing to embark on their digital transformation journey, right? They were leveraging the services from best of the breed vendors, which is why we were seeing portfolio diversification happening in various accounts, right? And all these factors were ultimately leading to pricing expansion. During Q1 of 2022, because of the heightened geopolitical conflict, with Russia launching a full-blown attack on Ukraine, we started hearing early talks of stagflation. However, key point to note is that the demand remained robust and providers continued to report bulging deal pipeline during the quarter, right? During the second quarter of 2022, we started witnessing inflation surge across most of the major economies. And to counter that, most of the central banks, they kind of increase the interest rates, right? The signal started pointing to an increased likelihood of recession. And it was kind of reflective in terms of slowdown in buyer decision making, at least in some pockets. And all this while the providers were also reeling with an unprecedented attrition. They were finding hard to address the demand because of the attrition. During the last quarter, which is Q3 of 2022, we observed somewhat mixed sentiments within the industry. On the positive side, we observed easing of employee attrition, and the overall demand also remained kind of decent. However, this was also the quarter wherein the quantum of net new digital transformation initiatives was to go down. Okay, so now we have seen the historical trends. Let's hear from Rahul on his observation of market during the current quarter and what the future holds on the outsourcing industry.
Right. So, in our discussions with various enterprise stakeholders as well as, the service providers, what we have realized is that, all of them are basically expecting, the global economic problems to continue, and recession is now almost a certainty. So to some extent, there is this expectation that there will be a reprioritization when it comes to spending from the part of enterprises. Like Pratik mentioned, there is some level of modernization fatigue which is setting in. And we would expect to see more impetus on initiatives that ultimately drive cost takeouts, as opposed to continuing with the modernization or transformation related initiatives. Now, if some of the people in the audience were present in our webinar in Q1 of the current year, they would remember that we had actually talked about the possibility of an upcoming recession or stagflation. And while that fear has been persistent throughout the year, if we focus on the financial results of the provider, they have actually been pretty robust. The year-on-year growth reported by major providers has been in the range of 17 to 19%, and even the broader industry actually has been growing upwards of 12%. If you look at the book-to-bill ratio as well, for the major providers, it still remains robust. So actually, let me ask this question to Kunal. Kunal, looking ahead, from the perspective of how we are seeing some of the signals from service providers, what is your take?
So Rahul, we are still talking about a double-digit growth guidance for fiscal year 2023. Major providers are likely to end this year with strong momentum, higher net new business, and that would provide a good foundation for the next year. Well, definitely we are seeing signs of cautious behavior by enterprise clients. The next year would likely provide greater opportunity in specific areas that would fuel future growth, such as marketing and sales operations, digital transformation, and of course, cybersecurity. One of the interesting things is that the inorganic growth could slow down compared to the activity seen last year and this year as well. Abhishek, growth guidance would also be influenced by talent pool acquisition and its impact on sourcing models. You have been tracking this area. What are some of the developing trends in this space?
Absolutely, Kunal, and as we see on the next page, this is an interesting chart, because any conversation about demand, we need to cover the sourcing mix as a whole. So over the past 12 years, if we look at it, there seems to be a consistent increase in the proportion of the use of GBS or in-house models. This seems to have changed a little bit, or if I may say, diverted from its path a little bit in 2021 and 2022. Part of which I believe could be that the pandemic impacted the setup of new centers and to some extent the expansion. Rahul, could there be some other reasons to this also? Because this is pretty interesting.
Yes, Abhishek. Actually, I would attribute this also to the strong demand for IT skills, especially the next gen skills such as cloud, AI, ML, analytics. On the one hand, we are seeing a lot of demand for all of these areas. On the other hand, the supply of talent was absolutely constrained, So GBS centers found it very difficult to fulfill the needs of the organization on their own. Therefore, enterprises had no option but to diversify, and give more work to service providers, But having said that, this might have been a minor blip, which was specific to the current year. Going ahead, it's quite likely that, if the recession actually plays out and, it would lead to a little bit stabilization in the talent equation, we might ultimately see the resurgence of, GBS centers moving ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Rahul. So in this section, we've covered, how demand has evolved. In the next few minutes, let's talk about how IT business services pricing has changed, and also get a point of view on future projections. But as we always say, pricing means nothing without context and the rationale and some insights. So before the numbers, Kunal, do you want to highlight the factors that have impacted pricing?
Absolutely. So if in retrospect, prices have largely followed the demand supply principle this year. It escalated in 2022 owing to high talent demand coupled with a supply crunch, particularly for specialized technology skills and domain-intensive business process services. Across the board, we are seeing high wage inflation and elevated levels of attrition that has propelled an increase in rates to align with higher expectation on service quality or be it innovation as well. Pradeep, besides these Geopolitical concerns are also impacting deal commercials. Would you like to deep dive here?
Sure, Kunal. And as you have already pointed out, the talent demand has been significant over the past 1.5 years. But then it's the talent crunch that has been playing spoil sports for the providers. This talent crunch issue has been further exacerbated because of the geopolitical issue, especially with the ongoing war in Eastern Europe. This war has impacted the global delivery from nearshore Europe, which, by the way, was gaining huge traction in the outsourcing industry earlier. It has also resulted in an enhanced demand coming in for some of the other geographies, established geographies such as India and LATAM countries. Then we also see delays happening in terms of processing of US visas, right? Service providers have been unable to land their resources on time, which has resulted in a higher usage of subcontractors. Now, subcontractors, as we all understand, are more expensive compared to the in-house resources. Now, providers have been trying to pass on the increased cost due to all of these factors to their clients. Okay, so now we have seen some of the factors that have impacted the pricing. On the next page, let's see the actual quantum of changes witnessed in the outsourced services pricing. All right. So as we may have observed, most of the factors highlighted earlier have contributed to an uplift in the pricing over the past 12 months. The pricing has gone up across levels and across onshore and offshore. Now, within IT application services specifically, we see a differentiated movement for two categories of skill sets. For traditional skills, which include the likes of .NET, Standard Java, C, C++, the pricing has gone up by roughly 5 to 8% at onshore and 3 to 7% at offshore. For specialized skills such as full stack, experience design, IoT, the increase was slightly more pronounced, with the increase higher by roughly a couple of percentage points. Now, this was again due to the demand-supply deficit that was more evident in such specialized skills. Now, that brings us to the question on how would the next 12 months pricing outlook look like, right? We have been hearing about expected slowdown and softness in the demand in future. Rahul and Kunal already talked about the cautious behavior being displayed by the enterprises. We anticipate that the expected slowdown as well as the base effect may mean that the pace at which pricing was increasing in the past few quarters would slow down. Now, doesn't mean that the pricing would reduce or there will be no increase. It's just that because of the factors highlighted earlier, we expect the upward trend in the pricing to continue over the next 12 months as well, albeit at a much lower pace. All in all, we foresee an increase of 2 to 5% for the pricing for traditional skills and roughly 3 to 6% for specialized skills. Okay. So let's hear Rahul's views on pricing trend and outlook for IT infrastructure services. Rahul?
Yes. So we saw a similar trend for IT infrastructure services pricing, Prateek. For traditional skills around compute, storage, workplace, help desk, etc., FT pricing at onshore increased by somewhere between 2.5 to 5% over the last 12 months, while at offshore it increased by about 3 to 6%. And for specialized skills in cloud and cybersecurity, the quantum of increase was higher, around 6 to 9%. It's similar to what we saw for applications, the price increase is expected to continue even in IT infrastructure services as far as FT pricing is concerned, though the pace of this price escalation is expected to start reducing. Now, importantly, as far as RU-based pricing or output-based pricing is concerned for IT infrastructure, the multi-year trend of reducing pricing continued, though we may be reaching a point where this will start bottoming out. Kunal, you are the SME for BPO pricing. So what do you see in that segment?
Yeah, Rahul. So in business process services, prices have largely increased. Could we move to the next page, please? Sure, thanks. So in business process services, prices have largely increased by 3 to 5% across back office and customer support operations. One of the things that we observed is that the tier 2 providers were seen to be a bit defensive in H1 2022, and that added to the competitive intensity in large deals. Now, throughout the year, we witnessed banking and insurance enterprise clients negotiate pretty hard on providers, expectation of a higher price increase, and this could be because of the war, the upcoming global economic slowdown. Going forward, the price outlook for business process services is inflationary. However, the slope is expected to taper due to global slowdown, which is forcing freezes in outsourcing spend and on account of higher competitive pressure owing to a slowing demand as well. Abhishek, across the IT and business process service clusters, we are seeing that the projections are inflationary. Shall we check with the group on their outlook for the upcoming year?
Absolutely, Kunal. So this is an opportune time to, during the session, to do the second poll. So which direction do the participants expect services pricing to move? All right. We'll give it another 5 to 7 seconds, I think. All right. So, yeah. All right. So clearly, in inflationary for sure. But, one of couple of things which strike out here, and if I look back maybe 12 months ago or 8 to 10 months ago, if we were to have done the same poll, the contribution of same or lower would have been less, as part of the total pie. Now clearly 60% shows that participants do expect a majority, to move ahead. Rahul, any takeaways from this?
Yes, I mean, it just kind of indicates that in the minds of the industry stakeholders, what seemed to be an out and out inflationary expansionist kind of an environment is not it will perhaps not hold up consistently in all segments in all regions. There will be areas where there'll be more caution, which will be kind of coming in, and there will be more stronger negotiations from the side of the enterprises. It's not surprising to kind of see this kind of a change. The market is really in a state of flux right now. So it's kind of expected to see that while majority of the people still expect the prices to increase next year, there are now a fair proportion of people who are kind of expecting the prices to either stabilize or start coming down. In fact, if we move on to the next slide, for our friends on the enterprise side, we are actually offering a complimentary price check for them to assess how their current contracted pricing compares to the market. In the chat, you will actually see a link. If you click on that link, you can request complimentary price benchmarks from us for 3 roles of your interest in IT applications or finance and accounting or contact center. And you can also specify, 3 countries for which you need the benchmarks. And, these can be either Canada, China, India, Philippines, Poland, or United States. And after you make your request, we will turn around the benchmarks within a few days.
Perfect. Thanks, Rahul. All right. So, we talked about the fact that, commercial competitiveness is never really in isolation. Price movements are a key part, but there are commercial clauses which have a great impact too. In fact, one of the questions which we received before the webinars as part of the set was, about, hey, what are the commercial T&Cs which are more aligned or changing with the times? So this section covers exactly that. And let's talk through, how some of these have been keenly negotiated over the past few months. Rahul, maybe we can start with COLA, everyone's favorite, I guess.
Yes, the all-important COLA clause. So what we saw, towards the end of the last decade, and even let's say at the beginning of the pandemic, was that in many cases, the deals that were getting signed, it did not have COLA clauses in them. And even in cases where COLA clauses were present, it was quite common to see them getting waived off. Enterprises were applying pressure on providers, and providers were accommodating. Now, why this kind of happened is not it's not very difficult to understand, because if we look at it between 2010 to 2020, if we kind of focus on operating costs for service providers, wage inflation, be it at onshore, be it at offshore, was quite stable. At onshore, it generally used to be between 1.5% to 3%, and at offshore, for example, in India, it used to be somewhere between 4% to 8%. Though this was not a low number, the 4% to 8%. However, it was also accompanied by, in general, a depreciating currency. It could be, let's say, INR in India, or in other countries in nearshore, and in other nearshore countries also, we saw a lot of depreciation happening in the forex. The net impact was that if we look at the onshore geographies, there was only a slightly inflationary trend in the overall operating costs. And likewise, even for offshore geographies, in spite of the high wage inflation, the net impact on the operating cost was only slightly inflationary. Hence, no surprise that providers were willing to kind of take some pressure from the clients, and then give way as far as the COLA clauses were concerned. But Prateek, now in the current situation, what have you observed with regard to the COLA clauses?
So Rahul, basis the deals that we have advised on recently, we are clearly seeing COLA now being included with greater force and with greater intensity, right? And that's definitely a diversion from the trend we used to see earlier. As we talk about what happened in the market post, let's say, H1 of 2021 onwards, we observe firstly the wage inflation started rising at an unprecedented level, right? For most of the onshore geographies, including USA. For offshore too, the average wage inflation increased at a greater magnitude compared to the historical figures. However, at least for offshore, it was the forex depreciation which came to rescue for most of the providers. Net, at an overall level, we observed the intensity of inflation going up significantly for both onshore as well as offshore. And all this while, since the demand was huge and it was a seller's market for quite some time now, we are also seeing that there has been an uptick in the deals with COLA. So there certainly is downtick in the deals wherein COLA isn't there anymore, right? These are some of the observation in terms of COLA that we have come across in the past 1.5 years. Let's hear Kunal's view on some of the other macroeconomic factors which impact the pricing. Kunal?
Right. Considering that predominantly costs are incurred in local currencies in global deals, We have seen a steep depreciation in offshore and nearshore currencies such as INR, PHP, PLN, and Romanian currency. So FX negotiation has become the most sought after negotiating lever for the enterprise sourcing and procurement teams. Historically, FX depreciation had been margin accretive for the providers. However, currently, this trend is serving as a lever for the enterprise to offset the inflationary-led rate increase expectations. Abhishek, would you like to elaborate on how these conversations between the enterprise and service providers are playing out based on how they are contracting the FX mechanisms in their agreements?
Sure, Kunal, sure. So effectively, it boils down to how the specific contractual language is structured, right? So, for example, if there is a full risk shared with the enterprise, they are liable to get clearly all the benefits as well, or as long as there's a shared risk. So in this case, typically a simple conversation, as it's acting on what's already signed in the contract, right? And many times there's an automated clause where, wherever it goes beyond a bit of a dead band, right? The rates need to be revised accordingly. Now, we've also seen cases over the past many years where things were relatively stable. Both the wage increases, FX also didn't move as swiftly. Then it becomes a bit of a hard negotiation if the full FX risk is with the service provider, because the provider might say, hey, this windfall is exactly all mine. But then some clients are using this to bargain discounts, citing that this windfall makes the change net neutral for the providers, especially when they come with the rationale of increased wages. So on the second scenario, it becomes more of a tougher negotiation, whereas on the first one, it's more of a straight conversation. I think we've talked about COLA, we've talked about kind of the FX. Let's talk a little bit also about service management, because this is critical, and this has taken so many different dimensions in the past 18 odd months that it's important to cover. Now, over the past 18 to 20 years, the whole concept of performance management historically has evolved from pinpoint, very fixed commitments to a more flexible and experience-oriented approach, right? So as the industry was shaping up, it was understandable that the concept had a fair set of skeptics. So there was a great need for very operational, very direct, very fixed metrics. Over time, what's happened is that, for good, for worse, part of this started to be gamed, what we call, the watermelon effect for one party's benefit. And there's an evolution now to keep it flexible, yet tightly linked to accountability, right? Rahul, I've mentioned the term watermelon effect, and this is so common that we're hearing these days, across the enterprise set that we engage with. What's been your experience?
I agree with you, Abhishek. In many deals, in many relationships, we are seeing that if they had the traditional SLA regimes, business users frequently reported not being happy with the quality of services, though providers cite sustained success in meeting or exceeding the SLAs. So in organizations with mature outsourcing governance mechanisms, we have started seeing a mix of trust-based initiatives and next-gen contractual metrics. These include joint reviews of SLAs and amending them to drive the right behavior without increasing the fee at risk or making any of the SLAs too stringent or unreasonable. We've also seen that both the parties are jointly reviewing unadjusted data, around the actual performance against the SLAs, and they're mutually brainstorming on how to practically overcome some of the shortcomings. We've also seen or started seeing the adoption of experience level metrics in addition to SLAs. These metrics are then linked to mechanisms that can either penalize providers in case of misses, but also reward them in case of an overperformance. So, I think this has yet to kind of reach a level where it becomes widely adopted, but some of these measures are now being seen in mature relationships. The next clause, which I think is worth touching upon, is the benchmarking clause. We have seen a lot of focus on that as well in recent times. So Prateek, what are your thoughts around this?
Sure, Rahul. So before we delve deeper into the benchmarking clauses, we need to understand that the presence of benchmarking clauses in contracts or the benchmarking itself is not a new concept, right? The enterprises used to get it included in the contracts as a mechanism to ensure that the vendor's pricing can be evaluated during the deal term. However, earlier, the issue was with regards to the definition itself, which used to be a bit vague. Given the sensitive nature of benchmarking, vendors and many a times clients too, they used to make their own interpretations to suit their needs. This was primarily due to the absence or inadequate benchmarking clause. What has changed is that in the past few quarters, we are seeing parties agreeing for more detailed and prescriptive execution guardrails and consequences in the contracts. As per our understanding, a good benchmarking clause is the one which details out, for example, scope, roles and responsibilities for each parties, any tactical or execution related considerations, and lastly, but most importantly, the consequences of the benchmarks. Right? What should be the way forward if the provider rejects the proposed modification? What's the escalation mechanism? All these should be detailed out in the benchmarking clause itself. So Kunal, can you just shed some more light on what benefit is being achieved by detailing out of benchmarking clause?
Yeah, so Prateek, if we look at the recent phenomena, and frequently this year, service providers have requested for a broad brush price increase across functions, geographies, roles. Now, one of the things that a comprehensive benchmarking clause does is that it helps the clients in validating and pinpointing the areas, skills, location, functions, where the price increase is justified. Interestingly, one of the trends we are observing in this space is that the enterprises are sponsoring the benchmarking exercise fully, especially in strategic relationships, large relationships. Now, having talked about the benchmarking clause, let us also deep dive into the other commercial terms and conditions, wherein we are definitely seeing interesting trends. Okay, so while we talked about the price increases and this year being largely a sellers of the providers market, the enterprise groups have definitely used commercial terms and conditions to balance or even obtain favorable outcomes. We will talk about 3 such clauses wherein enterprises are expecting an accommodative stance on behalf of the service providers. The first one is volume discounts. Herein, we are seeing that for the American region, volume discount slabs have remained similar to earlier years. However, for EMEA contracts, we are witnessing volume discounts even in relatively smaller deals. For example, less than €5 million deals. Another area which is seeing relentless pushback by the enterprises is the earn back clause. And this is not something new. We have been seeing this trend in the previous year itself. So Prateek, in your experience of negotiating contracts, helping out service providers and enterprises, what are some of the possible reasons for continued pushback on the earn back clause from the enterprise side?
So Kunal, the enterprises highlight the inherent flaws which exist due to the earn back mechanism. And their rationale to refuse earn back is that the business impact of poor performance cannot be recovered by overperformance at a later date. This is why we are seeing the prevalence of this construct to be reducing in some of the contemporary contracts. Having said that, we are still seeing some enterprises agreeing for an earn back mechanism, and this happens on cases where the service providers also agree to, let's say, stringent SLAs or fee at risk. In such cases, the rationale given by the parties is that the reward penalty mechanism should be equitable and fair.
Right, absolutely. The third clause that we would like to touch upon is termination. And herein we are also seeing interesting trends. So for example, on the termination fee, we are seeing that if the event occurs after 3 years into the contract term, there is a minimal termination fee. We have also observed multiple cases wherein there was no termination fee in the last year of the contract term. Other things such as notice period for termination for convenience, that is reducing. For example, the erstwhile 90-day termination notice for convenience are being pulled down to 60 days or less. Also, the expectations on a higher period for assistance services is seeing prevalence. As an illustration, we are seeing more instances of 12 to 18 months period becoming common compared to the contracted 6 to 9 months period in terms of the termination assistance services.
Okay, thanks, Kunal. This gets us to the most interesting part of the conversation today. Now, each one of us has our own perspectives and what the future looks like from a pricing and contracting perspective. Over the next few minutes, we'll also start answering some of the questions. But just to get the conversation going, I believe that we are at the cusp of an extreme talent shortage over the past 12 months and continuing, to be honest, right, in some shape or form, even though with some caution. And what could be sudden cost control, right, next 12 months. We're also seeing some green shoots, if I may use the term, on that topic. So in previous economic downturns, we've seen that sudden price reductions do happen, and that's possibly due to sudden salary cuts, layoffs, the usual things that one would expect in an adverse economic climate. So among the four of us, Rahul, I think both of us have seen the 2008 economic scenario play out, when we were a few years into our careers. And we're often tempted to think in similar ways around how future situations could play out. But clearly, things look like they could be a little different this time. What do you think?
Yes, the impact this time is unlikely to be as sudden, Abhishek. Given the current talent situation, in the market, in the coming months, while the in-flight projects will continue to go on, fresh discretionary spend is likely to slow down, as we discussed. And if we assume that this discretionary spend is largely focused on transformation involving the new age specialized skills, then the demand supply for these skills will also stabilize. So, I mean, overall, I believe the pricing could stabilize for these, perhaps even go down to some extent, but, it's unlikely that there will be a sudden change, so to say. On a related note, the current situation might also play out, interestingly, when it comes to the topic of pricing models that are being adopted for outsourcing services. Kunal, what's your sense on that particular point?
Yes, an interesting conversation, Rahul. So enterprises and providers both have seen that in a hyperinflation time, every dollar of wage increase mathematically impacts the fair pricing in case of labor-based models. So for example, per hour, per FT-based models. In contrast, managed services or unit-based models have seen more flex in terms of absorption due to opacity on how many resources are being used. Prateek, you will recall that we were speaking a few days back on whether the pricing model shifts will happen sooner now.
Yeah, exactly, Kunal. And on that front, we are really seeing a shift in the pricing model adoption, newer pricing model adoption. You see, there are a couple of points that we should be cognizant of. Firstly, the stakeholders which previously used to be uncomfortable with the complexity of alternative pricing models have also realized what it looks like when even by increasing rates, you don't get talent. In T&M contracts, most of the times, there's no major penalty associated with the resource ramp up or talent availability. The enterprises have understood that leveraging some of these alternative contracting models may at least reduce the impact of inflation on pricing. Plus, the provider would be committed to SLAs for the IT output. Right? Secondly, and again, this is also related to the first point, our hypothesis is that the outcome-based conversation, essentially those conversations which have a direct or an indirect financial or business impact, will mature between both parties. However, this is a long process and it takes time for enterprises to become comfortable with the idea of risk and control rebalancing.
Yeah. So the last part you mentioned is key, Pradeep, because advanced pricing models are simply not a ticket to just reducing cost or gaining flexibility, right? That's a very wrong presumption which some parties take. It is basically rebalancing of risk to the party most positioned to deal with it inexpensively, right? So the moment both parties would realize this, I believe it would lead to a much smoother discussion, much more helpful discussion around pricing model changes, right? So but I also know that Rahul was recently leading some analysis on how even providers have been slow in the transition to some of these models. So it's not that there's an inertia on the enterprise side. There's also some inertia on the provider side. Rahul, thoughts on that?
Yes, Abhishek. So we kind of came across a couple of contrasting observations, so to say. On the one hand, many of the traditional service providers, who generally make a lot of news around moving away from FT based pricing and trying to adopt some of the other models such as transaction based, output based, outcome based, etc. In many of the cases, in the contracts that they had, we really did not see much of a difference in terms of what they were ultimately using on the ground as a contracting model. Not too much of a delta compared to what, let's say, we were already seeing 3 to 4 years back. On the other hand, some of the newer entrants in the managed services domain have been more successful in changing the contracting model. For example, a couple of consulting focused players who are now entering into the market of system integration deals. They are actually linking a portion of the fee to the end outcomes that are realized. So net with some service providers or category of service providers, there is not much change, whereas a newer set of providers is actually trying to change the game.
Yeah, an important theme also is evolving client expectations. So some of the recent work that we have delivered points to a level of concern around a few commercial elements, specifically around innovation, performance management, and continuous improvement. Now let's talk about innovation. We have seen almost 3 years of major change. In 2020, COVID uncertainty and cost pressures ruled the outsourcing contracts. Last year, we saw a sudden U-turn into talent shortages. And this year, we are seeing continuation and exacerbation of the talent shortage. Now, one of the things, as a mind space clears out, the enterprise stakeholders would be realizing that there is a gap between the innovation story which was pitched to them by service providers and what they are actually seeing on the ground in terms of the business outcomes, in terms of the transformation benefits. So no wonder this is set to be an important conversation next year.
Yeah, spot on, Kunal. This is something, really, if I may use the term, true to very close to my heart. But the good news is that enterprises are understanding the importance of both internal steps incentivization, governance, integration, and external, really pushing providers. And by pushing, I mean pushing benevolently with the right intent to place in the right investments, right? So, for example, it was quite, I'll digress for a few seconds, but it was appalling that even in fairly large deals, there's no innovation lead appointed for years by providers who can help orchestrate the delivery of innovation, right? And rightly so, enterprises, do get a little upset when they say that there's a huge divergence between what was maybe shown during pitches versus what they see on the ground, right? So yeah, I see that changing for the good, and things should move in the right direction.
Yep. And maybe a similar thought with regard to performance management. Because of the unprecedented attrition, especially among the tenured resources, service delivery experience has taken a hit, in recent times. Like we discussed, the watermelon effect is a constant fixture across many of the conversations, that we have had in the last 6 months. As things potentially stabilize, enterprises will push for a more value or user experience conversation over and above constant struggle to get talent within their agreed budgets.
Yeah.
Pratik, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. And on that note, even continuous improvement has had a very interesting trajectory. This gained a lot of momentum till 2019 with enterprises pushing for what next, right? And providers baking aggressive numbers into their commercial commitments. Somehow, this took a backseat during the talent scramble. In standard managed services, things have been consistent, but for some of the elements like number of business KPIs added, SLA target improvement, user experience improvements, things have become static. Although we foresee many of these themes might take center stage in 2023.
Perfect. I'm just also conscious of time. Thanks, Rahul, Prateek, Kunal. Interesting, fast-changing times. I think Q1 of 2023 is going to be the time to watch out for. Let's now try and answer some of the questions, very interesting ones that we've received. Rahul, you and I were discussing, maybe we want to start with the question on, how inflation being managed in the next generation of deals.
Yes. So what we are seeing is that in the new deals that have been signed recently, firstly, there are higher caps that are being included in the COLA clauses. So historically, we used to hear that, okay, in an offshore location, a cap of 4%, at an onshore location, a cap of 2%. But keeping in mind that inflation has really shot up in various parts of the world, there is actually a trend towards including higher caps, as far as the COLA adjustment is concerned. Even in situations where, there is no index being used, it's a fixed year-on-year price increase metric. We have started seeing, higher levels of percentages getting contracted in the contracts. Interestingly, there is also in a few deals, we have started seeing that there is interest from both the service providers as well as the enterprises around the point that CPI is not a good proxy for wage inflation or for the overall operating cost inflation. And as a result, there are multiple deals in which instead of a CPI metric, the metric which is being talked about or, currently in the stages of negotiation is a wage inflation metric. So that's an interesting development that we have seen.
Yep. Thanks. Thanks, Rahul. Kunal, there was another question around how long we predict the pricing increases. Any thoughts on that? Quick thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a pretty interesting question. So based upon our analysis and talking to various client stakeholders, we do feel that next year it will be inflationary across the IT services and BPO services. However, depending upon how the enterprises and service providers are taking the benchmarking route for specific services, locations, and roles, there could be, a reduction in the pricing which has been contracted. We have to also look at we also have to look at the FX trends and the COLA trends, which are kind of very dynamic these days. So pretty interesting, but net next year it will be inflationary across IT and BPO services.
Yep. Okay, there was,
I think,
yeah. Pratik, go
there's
ahead.
a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a question around future operating model in terms of work from home, hybrid, or in office. How does that factor into pricing outlook? And interestingly, this has been a pertinent question which we have been asked since the pandemic had started. Now, during the initial few quarters of pandemic, we did see in a few accounts, the providers were passing on the benefits accrued due to working from home to their clients. However, to be honest, it's not so much in play in the current scenario. Most of the service providers have opted for a hybrid strategy, which is why they haven't entirely released the real estate and facilities. Now, some associated minor benefits are too less compared to the prevailing wage inflation. So net, we don't foresee any major impact on pricing due to work from home or hybrid.
Sure. I know we're conscious of time and we do have to cover two pages quickly, but there was an interesting question around, how to make sure that the right paying and right sizing for contracts. The time has never been better to do a contract review as it is today, just given the nature of entropy, which has happened in the past 2 years, pricing going up, talent crunches. So once the dust settles, I think that's the only way to get an objective view done. All right. Thanks so much for the questions, and thanks to my colleagues for answering them. There's just a couple of pages which I'll just quickly request Rahul to walk through.
Sure. So we just wanted to leave our audience with how we support the enterprise procurement and vendor management teams in capturing greater value from outsourcing, and we do this via an ongoing membership model or via one-time projects. The first membership is what we call Outsourcing Excellence, which is designed to provide clients with broad-based market intelligence on topics such as sourcing strategy, outsourcing solution design, risk management, etc. The second membership is called Pricing Analytics as a Service, which is designed to be more focused on pricing, performance, and contracting. The main focus of this membership is to get optimum spend reduction and then actually sustain it. Having said, we also execute a range of one-off bespoke projects covering themes such as rapid cost takeouts, price benchmarking, rationalization, etc. And then if we move on to the next page, in case all of you are wondering what is the source of all of the insights and guidance that we share as part of the webinars. So we work with a lot of enterprises in the pricing analytics as a service model. And as a part of that, we are not only sharing pricing intelligence with them, but also getting current information on their pricing for more than 300 roles, more than 150 resource units in close to 50 locations all over the world. It's not just restricted to pricing. The intelligence that we get, as you see on the right side, is actually covering various other areas such as effort ratios, solution insights, SLA, XLAs, etc. So for more details on this membership, please reach out to Abhishek or myself.
Thank you. I think we can close out today's session.